Shenington Kart Club Superprix meeting has been a major event on the club karting calendar since it started in the year 2000. The circuit, originally built in 1960, is steeped in history and regularly hosts both club meetings on a monthly basis and rounds of the British Karting Championships. Earlier, I spoke to Leslie Allen, the club chairman, about the history of the club, the circuit and some of the drivers that have raced here in the past.
The club started in 1960 on the old airfield that was here from the war, and it's been developing ever since, really. At the first meeting, I think they had 5,000 spectators, which is what we would like these days, but we don't tend to get anymore. And really the track was sort of set out with straw bales and barrels and things like that, and marked out, and really sort of developed from there. It was originally known as Solihull and Shenington Kart Club, and then in more recent times we're now just Shenington Kart Club. We've had, over the years, we've had a lot of drivers here who've made it in Formula One and various other, like Nigel Mansell. He really cut his teeth here at Shenington in the gearbox classes.
Graham, Superprix meeting this weekend. Give me a little bit of history.
We started the Superprix in the year 2000. It was our 40th anniversary at Shenington. And we got some of the guys that had collections of historic karts to come along with their karts from early 60s, even late 50s. And that snowballed, actually. We did it every year then, the revival. It became the Historic Revival, and it snowballed into what's now the British Historic Kart Club.
Tony, you're the chairman of the British Historic Kart Club. Lots of interesting karts in the marquee here. Let's just have a walk around and just point out some of the interesting ones. This one here, I think, is the oldest direct drive kart.
It is, yes. It's a kart that's a Bryce track kart from 1961 with a Montesa M100 engine. And that would have been, there were only two karts actually that went to the World Championships, the final round of the World Championships held in the Bahamas. And this is what they would have been running. Both the drivers, both Alan Button and Johnny Bryce, were using these track karts. And finally, I think overall Johnny Bryce came third in the World Championships with one of these karts. So quite an interesting piece of history, this one. This is really an Italian interpretation of the way karting came from North America. Karting started in North America, and they were typical of this kind of layout. But when the Italians got hold of it, they started to produce their own engines, so they started to use rotary valve engines, which is what these two Comet K12s are, rather than using McCullochs, rather than the chainsaw engines that the Americans were using, the McCulloch engines. This kind of kart, again, that Bobby Allen would have used to win the World Championships. So this is a kind of classic American kart, really, from that era.
And again, it's like a sofa to sit in.
Oh yeah, I mean you can see that the Americans like a bit of comfort, and it was very typical of what was about in the day. By this time you can see that instead of the engines being behind the seat like all these karts are we've looked at so far, the engine's now at the side of the seat, and the seat is side mounted over to the left-hand side. And all karts now look like this. Even modern karts, you've always got the seat on one side and the engine on the other side. This change happened in 1964, and it was a complete revolution. And as soon as that happened, the karts with the engine behind the seat was all over. It was all finished. This was really what happened after that. This is a Barlotti kart from 1968, and quite a good example of a vintage kart. This is quite interesting. It's made by a Birmingham company called Dale, and it was a kart that used to be similar kart to the one run by Nigel Mansell when he started. He started running for Dale. It's again single engine Class 1 kart from the 60s. Strange kart because it's got a sort of geared steering in here. There's a chain drive in here for the steering, but it's a quite tricky kart to drive. But Nigel did quite well in this. He ran them in juniors, and then a little bit later on, I think when he first started in seniors, he was still running one of these cars.
How often would we have seen this sort of steering setup, chain drive?
I've never seen anything like this before.
No, I haven't either.
It's not very good, to be honest with you, which is probably why nobody really adopted it. It's overcomplicated for no particular reason. And the idea is to try and get the steering column flatter and the steering wheel more like this than like this. So instead of holding the steering like that, you're holding it more like this and steering really with your wrists. You know, that was the idea.
And Nigel Mansell was what, a Dale Works driver, was he?
He was, yes.
Was that as a junior or a senior?
Yeah. He was sponsored by. Got a little bit of sponsorship and help from Dale.
Okay, so I assume then Nigel would have been involved in the development of this chassis, would he, as a Works driver?
Probably, yes. I mean, I imagine it. You know, he gave them feedback on how to improve it. Yes. Okay. This is a vintage Class 4 kart. And it's a Butler, which was typical of the karts made by some of the small car manufacturers who were making small series special cars at the time. They started making this this kart, this space fame type of kart. And again, you can see typical of the karts of the 60s. The engine is behind the seat again. It's over to one side, but the seat is in the middle. That's the point. And it's, again, butterfly steering wheel, Villiers engine. It's interesting, actually. It's only really in Britain where you see a lot of gearbox karts. In Europe, it's mainly 100cc Class 1 direct drive. Yeah. But when karting started in Britain, there were almost as many gearbox karts as there were direct drive karts. Now, that's peculiar to the UK.
Let me ask you this, and that's quite interesting for Paul Fletcher if you happen to be watching, because I had a conversation with Paul Fletcher recently, who owns PF International, and I said to him, well, Paul, why are we not having KZ1 gearbox karts at PF International? And he said a couple of things. He said, well, they used to be smelly and noisy. He said, to be fair, they have sorted that out. He said, but I just don't like them, so I don't allow them to race at my circuit. And he said it's not real karting, is it? That's what he actually said to me. But what you're saying is something completely different then, because you're saying that really gearbox karting is real and it is traditional.
I think it's certainly the case that you'll find that a lot of Class 1 drivers, I mean, I'm a Class 1 driver. I don't know much about Class 4s, to be honest. And Class 1 drivers drive Class 1s. Class 4 drivers drive Class 4s, and they are separate. Paul Fletcher, I've no doubt, has never been in a Class 4 in his life, and he's certainly not a Class 4 person at all. I know Paul quite well, and he doesn't like gearbox karts. He's not a gearbox person. He's a direct drive person.
Simon, tell me a little bit about Karting Legends.
Karting Legends was started in 2010 by Neil and Viv Ward, patrons of the club. It's all to do with karts I've used in the late 90s, early 80s. So we're doing replicas of the original karts that were used then. We do them from pictures, so we just try and replicate the karts. So we have got some original karts in the club, but we mostly do replicas of certain people that race. The famous ones have raced in the past.
Okay, and talking about famous people then, none more so perhaps than Mark Allen, one of the more famous karters over the years. And Mark, we've got a replica here of your kart. You're on the front of Kart Racing Monthly there. We can see that in the seat. How close is this as a replica to the kart you actually raced?
Well, it's pretty close to the kart I won the GP in 1990. It's a Zip kart, obviously made by Martin Hines, the late Martin Hines. I was sponsored by Zips for 1 year. And was very successful with it. The motor I actually used was a KTM, and this one's actually a Yamaha, but other than that, it's pretty good, as you can tell by the photograph.
And this is obviously designed, can race on obviously kart circuits like this, but on full motor racing circuits, just for people that aren't aware how fast these things go, on somewhere like Alton Park, Silverstone, what sort of speeds are these getting up to?
I mean, they will. The older karts like this, well, actually the top speed is very similar to the modern day karts, because the modern day karts have a lot more aero, so they are quicker on an overall lap. But down the straights, you were looking at Silverstone when we were on the Grand Prix track at pulling just over 130 miles an hour, so quite quick.
Rob, you were the British champion in 1968 and 1970. Now, you've got 4 karts we're looking at here. Let's look at this one first. This is the kart from 1968, but you also won the championship in 1970 on this one.
Yeah, it was a Zip Silverstone, Mark 1. They went through Mark 1s to Mark 5s in 2 years. Virtually the same, just varied differences. Same engine by the same manufacturer, Chris Merlin from Merlin Developments. Exhaust changed. Tyres slightly changed, but the development was chassis orientated. Pedal design was different. Parts of the chassis were different. You know, manufacturing things generate like Formula One now. Just upgrades all the time. So
Yeah, and the obvious difference between these two karts, we've got this one here. Now that's the 68 kart, this is the 70. The obvious difference here is clearly the width of the rear tyres. The fronts are very similar or the same, but obviously we're starting to see what is more of a modern tyre here.
Goodyear developed a tyre called the Eliminator and Blue Streak, and they were 6 inches in diameter instead of 5-inch diameters, the same as that one. Gave you more grip, better traction, and just a development again. But also the karts went from a sort of a chassis like this to A-frame chassis, which was developed in Europe to make them handle better, but they were very fragile. Being they were pointed and the parts were added on to the side, they were very vulnerable to breakage. So that idea only lasted about 3 months. So I had one, crashed it Cradwell Park because the front wheel fell off, and 150 mile an hour sort of thing, and that was it. Went back to this. So the development was, and the engines also developed. They used to be 4-speed motors, then they went to 5-speed motors, where these are only 200cc, they're 250cc, so they've got 2 carburetors against the 1. Development were also the gear levers were slightly changed on them. All slight different things. The brake drums were slightly different. The development progressed and materials progressed mostly.
Racing gets underway after the break, but in the meantime, if you want more information about the British Historic Kart Club, then check out their website. And if you're interested in starting karting in the UK, then check out the Association of British Kart Clubs website. The address www.abkc.org.uk. Every circuit and kart club in the country is listed there. Highlights of the racing here at the Shenington Superprix start after the break.